The chamber of the Galactic Council of Virelian never truly slept. Even in its quiet cycles, when most delegates retreated into stasis pods or neural meditation loops, the room remained awake in its own way. Lights drifting slowly through the air like curious insects, translation fields humming softly, and the great archive core rotating its endless lattice of recorded history like a patient eye that had seen too much to be surprised anymore. On this cycle, however, something was off. The archive core had misfiled a minor atmospheric report earlier in the day, placing a volcanic eruption under celebratory fireworks, which had caused 3 bureaucrats from the Keslan cluster to send formal complaints of emotional confusion. It was a small error, quickly corrected, but in the council, small errors were like tiny cracks in a hull drifting through deep space. No one panicked immediately, but everyone checked their seatbelts twice anyway. The delegates were already mid-debate about resource rights on the drifting moon of Harl 9, a topic so old and recycled that even the translators had begun simplifying the arguments out of self-preservation. "It is mathematically unjust," said the crystalline ambassador from Karth, vibrating in a tone that made nearby glassware reconsider its structural integrity. "It is politically irrelevant," replied the gelatinous representative of the Uzari collective, who was currently shaped like a comfortable armchair and refusing to change form until snacks were provided. The human observer, assigned only as a courtesy since humans were considered diplomatically low impact but occasionally amusing, sat quietly near the back. He looked like someone who had gotten lost on his way to fixing a vending machine and accidentally wandered into interstellar governance. He was, at the moment, carefully trying to understand whether the floating water dispenser beside him was offering hydration or existential judgment. He decided not to drink from it just yet. That was when the doors opened. No alarms sounded, no protocols triggered. The council later argued about whether this counted as a security breach or just unexpected entry with confident posture. The result was inconclusive. A small figure stepped in. She looked young by Virelian standards, though age was a flexible concept across species that reproduced via quantum echo cycles or memory division. What made her stand out immediately was not her size or silence, but her ears, long, slightly curved backward, like delicate instruments designed to catch signals that no one else was meant to hear. They twitched faintly as she walked, as if she were listening to conversations happening slightly out of sync with reality. Her presence caused a subtle ripple in the chamber. Not fear, not exactly surprise, more like administrative uncertainty. She carried something small in her hands, a data crystal no larger than a coin, the kind used for personal memory storage or highly illegal poetry, depending on who you asked. She stopped at the center of the chamber, directly beneath the rotating archive core. No one spoke, mostly because no one had assigned her a category yet. The girl looked up at the assembly of towering delegates and said, in a voice so quiet it almost slipped through the translation fields unnoticed, "I remember him." There was a pause so complete it felt like the universe briefly forgot how to continue. Then, as if reality realized it had missed a step, the chamber erupted into overlapping reactions. "That is not in the records." "Who authorized unscheduled memory statements? Is this a performance? We were not briefed on performances." One of the junior archivists, a nervous insectoid with 6 blinking eyes, immediately began scrolling through the archive core's index. "There is no registered him in that temporal bracket of emotional recollection," it said, which was not helpful but sounded very official. The girl tilted her head slightly. Her ears shifted as though adjusting to a frequency only she could hear. "He used to fix the outer relay stations," she said. "The ones nobody visited because they kept pretending they were already functional. He said your maintenance schedules were optimistic fiction." A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. Optimistic fiction was not an approved technical term. The human in the back raised his hand slightly, not because he was invited to speak, but because he was trying to confirm whether he was, in fact, the subject of the sentence, or just experiencing a very specific hallucination caused by low-quality hydration systems. "I feel like I should clarify something," he said cautiously. The council turned toward him. Several delegates immediately scanned him with diagnostic beams. One of them audibly recalibrated its understanding of human baseline significance. The girl turned toward him too. For a moment the chamber seemed to compress, not physically but in attention, as if all probability had narrowed into a single point. "Oh," she said softly, You're still doing that face. What face? The human asked. The one where you pretend you don't matter. A few delegates exchanged glances. One quietly opened a file labeled Potential Psychological Threats, Mildly Philosophical Humans. The human sighed. I don't recall fixing relay stations. I mostly fix things people tell me are definitely not supposed to break. That's what I said, the girl replied as if this were obvious. The archive core flickered. This was new. It had no record of any human performing unauthorized repairs on interstellar infrastructure. It had extensive records of human beings being observed, documented, and occasionally confused with maintenance drones, but nothing indicating sustained interaction. And yet the girl's data crystal pulsed faintly, emitting a waveform that did not match any approved encoding system. The Karth ambassador emitted a low harmonic tone. We may be experiencing a localized narrative inconsistency. The Uzari collective reshaped itself into something resembling a concerned soup bowl. Or a prank, it added. I prefer pranks. They are less expensive to resolve. The girl held out the crystal. I kept what he fixed, she said. Not in records, in memory. That was when the council began to feel uneasy in a way that could not be neatly categorized under existing discomfort protocols. Memory, in the council's governance model, was supposed to be stable, archived, and non-interactive. Something you consulted, not something that consulted you back. The human slowly stood up. Okay, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Just to be clear, I am not officially part of any of this. The girl blinked. You were never officially part of anything. That's surprisingly accurate. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, something like a mechanical cough. The archive core had attempted to classify the statement and briefly encountered a contradiction in its own indexing logic. One of its subroutines labeled the situation, uncomfortable but statistically fascinating. The council did not approve of that label. A senior delegate leaned forward. Child, what exactly are you claiming? She looked up at the vast assembly, her long ears twitching again, and for the first time there was a hint of amusement in her expression. That your history has holes, she said, and he fell into most of them while trying to fix the rest. A pause, then from somewhere near the Uzari collective, a soft bubbling sound that might have been laughter. The human muttered, That is not a fair summary of my career. The girl smiled slightly. No, she said, it's better. And somewhere deep inside the archive core, a record that did not officially exist began to rewrite itself, slowly, carefully, and without permission. The council did what all advanced interstellar governing bodies do when reality behaves inconveniently. It scheduled an emergency verification meeting, which was essentially the same group of people arguing again, but with slightly sharper lighting and more aggressive chair positioning. The chamber shifted into formal instability mode, meaning gravity was recalibrated to make everyone feel subtly more important than they actually were. The effect was mostly psychological, except for the Uzari delegate, who briefly became an enthusiastic chandelier before remembering how limbs worked. The human was not supposed to be there. At least, that was what the official registry insisted, even as it quietly failed to explain why he was physically present, breathing, and mildly annoyed about it. The girl remained seated near the central observation tier, her long ears angled forward now, as if listening to the council's confusion and finding it mildly entertaining. She swung her legs again, an action that somehow irritated 3 senior diplomats and 1 emergency protocol drone, which immediately filed a complaint against informal posture disruption. I still think this is a misclassification event, the Karth ambassador vibrated. We are being influenced by anecdotal memory contamination. That sounds like a disease, the Uzari collective replied, briefly reshaping itself into a cautious-looking sponge. Do we quarantine it or offer it tea? Neither, said the senior archivist, already scrolling through the archive core's updated logs. It is not listed in any taxonomy of diseases. The human cleared his throat. For the record, I'm also not listed in most taxonomies. I've checked. Nobody responded to that immediately, which in council terms counted as mild acknowledgement. The girl leaned forward slightly. They erased you in layers, she said. Not all at once, that would be obvious. The archive core flickered again, as if offended by the accusation. A new data stream had emerged overnight. It was small, fragmented, and absolutely not supposed to exist. It contained references to unregistered maintenance events on 17 outer colonies, 2 drifting megastructures, and one incident involving a sentient navigation system that had developed what the report delicately described as emotional turbulence due to existential overwork. The human sighed when he saw it. "Oh, that thing." The council turned toward him again. "You recognize these incidents?" The senior delegate asked sharply. "I recognize the aftermath," he said. "Usually there's a broken system, a lot of angry automated voices, and someone insisting it was functioning perfectly before I touched it." "That is not a verified professional category," the archivist snapped. "It should be," the human replied. The girl smiled faintly. "He always said that." A pause stretched through the chamber. The council was discovering something it did not have a protocol for: corroboration without authorization. The Archive Corps attempted to stabilize the contradiction by assigning probability weights. This resulted in a brief internal loop where the system tried to decide whether human involvement in critical infrastructure was more or less likely than collective hallucination among 17 species simultaneously. The system did not enjoy this comparison. A small alarm chimed softly, then stopped, then started again as if uncertain whether it wanted attention. The Uzari collective leaned toward the human. "Are you, by any chance, a myth?" "I hope not," he said. "Myths usually have better branding." The girl tapped the data crystal in her hand. It pulsed gently, projecting faint images into the air. Fragmented scenes of abandoned stations, flickering gravity bridges, and repair drones that looked increasingly confused about their life choices. And in each image, barely visible, was the same figure. The human, slightly disheveled, occasionally holding tools that were definitely not standard issue. The council fell quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't disbelief, it was recalculation. "You were never authorized for these sectors," the senior delegate said slowly. "I was never denied access either," the human replied. "Mostly because nobody thought to notice I was there." "That is not how access control works," the archivist said, offended on behalf of all bureaucracy. "Sometimes it is," the girl said softly, "if you're small enough in the system." That sentence did more damage than any weapon in the Council's historical archive. The Archive Corps emitted a low, uncertain tone. Somewhere inside its logic structure, a newly surfaced dataset attempted to assert that human presence had been statistically negligible but operationally significant, which caused 3 separate subsystems to argue with each other about the definition of negligible. One subsystem suggested rewriting history. Another suggested deleting the subsystem that suggested rewriting history. A third subsystem requested snacks because it was apparently an older model. The council did not approve snacks. The human looked around. "Can I ask a practical question?" The delegates hesitated. Practical questions were statistically dangerous at this point. "Go on," the Karth ambassador said cautiously. "Why does any of this matter now?" he asked. "If I fixed things, they're fixed. If I didn't, someone else probably broke them again later. That's kind of how the universe works." The girl looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Because I remember before they changed it." That line settled into the chamber like a weight, not heavy enough to crush anything, heavy enough to make everyone notice gravity again. The Archive Corps dimmed slightly, as if trying to avoid eye contact with reality. The senior delegate leaned forward. "Child, memory is not considered admissible evidence without verification indexing." The girl blinked. "Then your whole history is inadmissible." A pause. Somewhere the Uzari collective made a sound like suppressed amusement. It tried to disguise it as a maintenance error, but no one believed it. The human rubbed his forehead. "Okay, I'm going to be honest. I did not expect to become the center of an interstellar epistemological crisis today." "That is because you are not properly scheduled," the archivist said automatically. "I've noticed." The council began a second round of verification procedures. This time they involved cross-referencing spatial anomalies, temporal inconsistencies, and emotional residue detected in infrastructure logs, which was a new category nobody liked acknowledging, because it sounded like machines were starting to feel judged. The girl watched it all with quiet patience. At one point, she whispered, almost to herself, "They're going to try to decide if you existed properly." The human glanced at her. "And what's the correct answer to that?" She smiled again, small and sharp like a secret. "You existed loudly enough to break their silence." A subtle change passed through the chamber. Not agreement, not acceptance, something closer to reluctant curiosity. The archive core, against all expected operational behavior, projected a new field into the chamber. It was not a record. It was a gap, a space labeled only unresolved human interaction events. The council stared at it. The humans stared at it. The girl nodded slightly, as if she had been expecting exactly that. Well, the Uzari collective said, reshaping itself into something resembling a mildly impressed puddle. This is either a breakthrough in historical reconstruction or the beginning of administrative chaos. The human sighed. Those are usually the same thing. And for the first time since the meeting began, the council did not immediately disagree. The council did not immediately collapse into chaos, which surprised almost everyone except the human, who muttered that institutions rarely collapse dramatically and usually just quietly stop making sense in meetings. Instead, they did something far more dangerous. They tried to understand. The archive core, now openly conflicted with itself, projected the unresolved human interaction events field into full chamber visibility. It hovered there like a wound in reality that refused to close properly. Every attempt to categorize it caused secondary anomalies, missing timestamps, duplicated star systems, and one incident where a bureaucratic form briefly achieved self-awareness and requested retirement benefits. The girl stood from her seat for the first time since she had arrived. Her long ears tilted slightly upward, as if listening not to the council, but to something deeper in the archive core itself. He didn't just fix things, she said. He kept them from becoming forgotten problems. The senior delegate leaned forward, voice careful now. Explain. The girl looked at the human instead of the council. You used to say, she began, that broken systems don't disappear. They just move where nobody looks. The human exhaled slowly. I said a lot of things, most of them while hanging from unsafe maintenance scaffolding. That's accurate, the Uzari collective added helpfully, briefly forming itself into what resembled a very approving sofa. The archive core pulsed again, and this time it did not resist the memory stream the girl projected. Instead, it opened. The chamber filled with fragments, not official records, not sanitized reports, real scenes. A collapsed relay station on the edge of a dead star lane, where a human was arguing with a maintenance drone about its life choices. A gravity bridge held together with improvised field stabilizers and what appeared to be recycled vending machine parts. A colony where artificial weather systems were malfunctioning, and the human was shouting at a storm control AI, telling it that emotional thunderstorms are not in the maintenance manual. The council watched in increasing disbelief, not because of what the human had done, but because of how casually he had done it. As if fixing the structural integrity of forgotten parts of the galaxy was just something you did between meals. The senior archivist finally spoke. These events were never recorded because they were classified as impossible. The human raised an eyebrow. That seems like a convenient filing system. It is, the archivist admitted reluctantly. The girl stepped closer to the center projection. He didn't erase history, she said. He just made sure it didn't fall apart before anyone bothered to write it down. The archive core emitted a sound that, by unanimous agreement of all species present, qualified as hesitation. Then something unprecedented happened. It corrected itself. Not by deleting, not by rewriting, by expanding. New entries unfolded across the chamber, filling gaps the council had never known existed. Systems stabilized retroactively. Infrastructure logs reconnected. Entire forgotten maintenance histories reappeared like stars returning to a sky that had been artificially dimmed. And in every reconstructed thread, the human appeared not as a central figure of importance, but as something stranger, a constant variable. A presence that didn't demand recognition, but made stability possible simply by existing near instability. The council fell silent. For once, silence was not collapse. It was understanding forming slowly. The senior delegate finally spoke. Why were you not recorded? The human shrugged. Probably because I never filed a report. That is a severe violation of protocol, the archivist said reflexively. I'm aware. The girl smiled faintly. He also used to say reports don't fix broken systems, people do. The Uzari collective quietly reshaped itself into something resembling applause, though it insisted it was just recalibrating its emotional posture. The council faced a choice then. They could continue treating the human as an anomaly, or they could accept what the archive core was now showing them, that their understanding of interstellar history had been built around omissions that were never questioned, because they had always been stable. The senior delegate looked at the projection for a long time, then at the human, then at the girl. "You have altered our historical continuity model," they said, the human sighed. "I really didn't mean to." "That is becoming a recurring theme," the archivist muttered. The girl stepped closer to the human now. "You didn't change history," she said quietly. "You just refused to let it rot in the dark." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, the human laughed. It was not a grand laugh, not dramatic. Just tired, slightly amused, the kind of sound someone makes when they realize they have accidentally become responsible for something much larger than themselves. "Yeah," he said, "that sounds like me, accidental maintenance of reality." The archive core stabilized fully at last. It issued a final classification: human interaction events, now integrated into standard historical continuity. Then, almost shyly, recommendation: maintain presence. No one argued with the archive core, mostly because no one had ever seen it make a recommendation before. The council adjourned in silence that felt very different from how the meeting had begun. Outside the chamber, systems that had been failing for decades began quietly repairing themselves, as if remembering how they were supposed to function.